So I guess as a corollary to that, what's pretty important is having the right people for the next generation of acousticians. And so many people come to acoustics from different areas. It struck a chord with me when Richard was talking about waves. My PhD was in an applied maths department looking at waves that weren't necessarily acoustics. You know, as long as it was a Helmholtz equation or something like that, that was fine. And I got into acoustics that way. So it's becoming a struggle for some of the main centres of acoustics in academia, the likes of ISVR and Salford University, in terms of recruiting these undergraduates at a top level to really push forward acoustics for the next generation. So one thing that we really want to look at in the Institute is how do we encourage young people to become enthused about acoustics, and not even become enthused, but also just become aware, because as Rich has outlined, it's a subject that permeates so many different areas, yet is very rarely given the spotlight in and on its own. So there are so many young people who probably it's never occurred to them that acoustics might even be an industry or a possible career for them. And so with this in mind, we now have an IOA STEM committee. So for those who don't know, STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics, and it's a way of encouraging those subjects in schools, and people can become STEM ambassadors, and they volunteer their time and they go into schools and they go to careers fairs and they go to science fairs, and they promote their topic of industry. So the STEM committee for the IOA on acoustics started off as a sort of subcommittee of the education committee, started off as a working group, and then it sort of gradually, slowly is evolving from that. It's still in its early form. It still looks a bit like the children around the table. Pretty much. We're all keen, we're all willing to get our hands dirty, but it's still a bit of a mess. A coherent picture perhaps is still emerging, shall we say. We've had 3 meetings this year, which have been really good, and the last one was yesterday. So I produced this morning on purpose, because yesterday was a really good discussion about the aims of the group and the strategy for the group going forward, and how we can maximize interest in acoustics amongst young people. And I was hoping that some of that would feed into today. So when we started this, and there was the genesis of this, there were some terms of reference for the working group as it was then, and it had a number of statements in it that various people had input into, and some of them I've just thrown up there. The group will coordinate the Institute's STEM ambassadors, it will take care of maintaining demonstration experiments we have to give in the classroom, it will try and come up with some further teaching aids to help these STEM ambassadors when they do go to the classroom, and it's all good stuff and it's all fine, and all of it's true, but none of it really spoke of a strategy for the group. It was just sort of odds and sods about little ideas about sorts of things the group could help out with. So what we've really trying to be looking at is, can we push that over into a goal? Can we have a clear vision? Because one of the things you come to realize when you go and talk to other industries is that we don't necessarily have the number of members or the budget or the reach of the Royal Academy of Engineering or the Institute of Physics or something like that. So we have to be very targeted in what we do, and there's a danger that if you try and just do everything, you end up doing nothing. And if you don't have a strategy, then people do good work and they help out, but it's inconsistent, and you don't maximize the benefit. Maybe one year you're going to a primary school, but that's great, you might enthuse them all, but if you never go back, and if the teacher's never left with any material to work with, it's a one-off. it's in one ear and out the other, and there's a potential audience there you may have lost. So what can we do? This don't take this too seriously. This is not defined. This was literally made up by me this morning. I have not run this by anyone. Do not take this as gospel. But this was just a starter for 10, an idea. Where do we want to go with the STEM committee? Can we grab as many young people as possible? So, instead of working with this many, we're working with this many, and it looks great and futuristic and jazzy. So one of the things we need to understand is in order to get there, what do we need to focus on? Can we focus our efforts? At the moment, I've got a slide, perhaps these are the wrong way round, but the next slide is on current activity and what we're currently doing, and some of those are really good things and they're really valuable things, but they're not necessarily in and of themselves going to get us to where we need to be. So one of the key things we need to do is we need to get teachers and those within the educational establishment on board with what we're doing, so that we're not just seen as some kind of one-off wacky science fair novelty where you come in, you give a bit of an experiment and everyone goes wow, but doesn't actually associate that with an industry, a career in acoustics, an ongoing developing knowledge of acoustics, a commitment to acoustics and that kind of thing. We had some discussions about, with that in mind, where do we focus our efforts? Age range. We're looking from reception in primary school through to university and postgraduate degrees, and can we convince people who are doing physics degrees to do master's degrees in acoustics? And that's a huge range, and I think we'll keep that range. I don't think there's any reason to dismiss any of it, but I think if you are looking to focus, it makes sense in many respects to focus on secondary school, to focus on those students who are choosing GCSEs and A-levels, choosing degree courses, starting to think slowly about the kind of careers. Going back to what I was saying about how we were sometimes a small fish with respect to some of the other engineering groups, we could potentially argue that the engineering groups and the physics groups are enthusing the primary school children in STEM subjects and in engineering and in physics and mathematics, and that we can essentially piggyback on that by coming in at a secondary school level. It's unlikely that anyone age 7 is going to commit themselves thinking, that's what I want to be. I want to be an acoustic engineer, and that's it from age 7. So if they're already being enthused about STEM subjects, perhaps we can take advantage of that and direct people towards acoustics as they get further in their studies. As I alluded to earlier, we want to try and get repeated representation at events, at schools, at fairs. If we can embed ourselves in these events such that it becomes a regular activity, even if it's not given by the same person, as long as we have a consistent message and a consistent thing we want to do, we can get much more long-term value for money out of it. And we also want to try and get a voice within the wider STEM community. So when the Institute of Physics talks about all the amazing things that physics can do, sound should be part of that. It should be, it should be highlighted. And at the moment, there is an extent to which it's glossed over slightly. We want to try and make sure we get a good geographical spread across the country, if possible. We're all stood and sat here in London, as many people are, as the graph showed from earlier. But there's a decent spread of branch meetings, as we know, across the country, and so that's what we want to try and reach out, and we want to try and make sure that talks like this don't just happen at the London branch meetings, but happen at all the other branch meetings as well. We can support this with resources, ideas, plans, encouragement to people who are STEM ambassadors in terms of what they can do, and encouraging those who aren't to become them. And this is something we are doing. It links into the next slide, where We have a repository for these kind of resources now through the Institute of Acoustics website. So many people just have their own thing. They just go off and they do their own thing. Maybe they have children at a school and they go and visit that school once a year, and they might have their own material from what they've been talking about or what they've been presenting or what they've been experimenting with the kids. But no one else knows about it. It just sits on their laptop, or maybe their colleague knows about it in the acoustics department, but that's it. The wider community has no idea that there's this really cool thing they've got that, you know, could be passed around. So that's one thing we're trying to move forward. And another thing we have to think about is can we get the right kind of messages across about acoustics? And what are those messages? You know, you can just say, oh yeah, acoustics is interesting, it's fun, it's great. Is that all we want to say? What else do we want to say? And because you'll have people going into schools and going to careers fairs, and they're different kinds of events, so they'll be saying different things. So some people will be talking about their career in acoustics and how they got into it and what they do on a day-to-day basis and what's interesting about it. Whereas others won't be touching upon that at all, and they'll just be telling the children about how sound propagates, you know, and the physics of it, and it's a case, and both of those things are valuable, but how can you make sure that they're joined up, and that both of those things provide the bigger picture of how you can end up working in acoustics and what working in acoustics means. So what are we doing at the moment? As I say, it's relatively early days. We haven't done anything particularly revolutionary, but we're making small steps. So one of the first things we need to do is to understand how many STEM ambassadors we have in the Institute of Acoustics. Fairly straightforward question, but we didn't know the answer to begin with. So one of the things we're doing to try and work that out is you can now highlight that within your details on the IOA website. So if you are, please do that. Please spread the word. It's been in email bulletin update and things like that, but I'll hold my hand up. I don't always read to the bottom of those things. It can easily get lost. So just highlighting it again, yeah, under your details, edit details, extra details, there's a checkbox. Are you a STEM ambassador? You can check that. And it's not like we're going to check up on that with the stem.org site and police it. So, it's a box that means, are you interested in doing STEM ambassador-like activities? So even if you're not a STEM ambassador, but it's something you'd be willing to be involved in volunteering for, I would encourage you to tick that box. It's that's really what it's for. It's to create like a mailing list and a group of people we can go to for these kinds of things, rather than a completely are you a STEM ambassador precisely. So as I said before, we've got a repository of resources currently. Only certain members of the committee can access it. We will expand that. I think that's partly probably out of embarrassment of the state of all the documents at the moment, but it's at least a starting point. It's where we can put all this information. So certainly within my company, we've got a large acoustics group, so we've created a document about how you can get into becoming a STEM ambassador, what it means, advice, help, all sorts of different lesson plans, lessons, ideas for different age groups, links to resources on different YouTube videos, different websites, things that can help you, things to consider, messages you might want to get across, and that sort of thing. So if we can start having a focal point for collating all that information, then that could be a really valuable resource for people who want to get involved. We've also been just getting out there and doing stuff, representing at science fairs, at schools. You may have seen Vicky on the front cover of the IOA bulletin the other month at the Big Bang Fair. Yeah, doing a good job of publicising it, but and we want to continue to do that, but we want to try and do that in a strategic way. So how are we going to do this moving forward? So I've talked about what we'd like to do, but what sort of practical steps might we be considering for next year, which of course, as you know, is the year of sound, so it's quite a convenient time to really jump on board and move this forward. So yes, one thing we want to do is we want to get an idea of the IOA STEM ambassadors and those interested and where they work and where they are, and we want to get them connected up with local schools, and we want to get them providing regular support to those schools and providing material that we can create to help the teachers take that interesting acoustic experiment or that interesting acoustic lesson that was given and integrate it within the curriculum. Because teachers aren't going to be motivated to do it with all the pressure they're under if it's not integrated into their curriculum and if it doesn't tick a load of boxes for them. They don't want to have to take time out of what they consider as teaching the essentials to have this acoustics lesson. So it's about integrating the two, and it's about having enough material that integration can happen properly and can happen over a number of lessons, and it's not just one STEM ambassador going in and making something go bang and everyone, you know, puts ear defenders on and that's the end of it. It's you know, they can do homework on it, they can do lesson plans on it, it can cover other subjects, it can cover creative writing where you have to persuade someone why you deserve your acoustics grant, you know, it can cover all sorts of things. So that's where we want to go. We also have a lot of liaison to do with the wider community, and make it known what we're doing and ask questions about what they're doing. So I've kind of listed them in order. Start at the beginning, get our own house in order, understand what the IOA is doing, what the Education Committee is doing, what comms are doing, and how we fit into that. And then also the wider acoustics community. How does what we're doing link with, complement what the ANC, Future Acousticians, are doing? How does it line up with what UCAN might be looking at? What universities might be doing to encourage students onto their courses, in those that do acoustics courses. So all of that kind of stuff is going to help. And then, as I said before, as alluded to before, trying to get a voice within the wider engineering and physical sciences community. And, you know, if they can be talking about where their subjects have a Venn diagram crossing with acoustics, that can give us so much more exposure because they're such large organisations. So in the short term, what can everyone do to help? Well, you can become a STEM ambassador. That's a good start, isn't it? So the website address is up there. But yeah, that would be fantastic. The STEM organisation asks that you only do a minimum of one event a year. So it's a volunteering thing, but they only ask that you keep at least one event, tell them about one event a year that you've been involved in. So that could just be, you know, an hour in a classroom. So it's not a massive commitment necessarily. It can obviously be more than that, and we'd love it if it's more than that, but you know, the minimum is fairly easy to achieve. They send out, for those who don't know, they send out regular emails, regular updates from schools, from careers fairs, from colleges, from other organisations who are looking for STEM ambassadors in their area. And so there are lots of, even if you think, oh well, I don't have children or I don't know the local schools, or it doesn't matter, they will, trust me, once a month bombard you with information about what you could be doing in your local area. Another thing we really want to do is, and this is the same for the STEM group as it is for the STEM organisation themselves, is feedback, because it's so easy to forget. I mean, I've done it. You go, you give a lesson, it went well, you think, oh, that's great, and then it's done, and then you're back to your day job and you forgot it ever happened. Try and tell everyone. Tell us. We've got an email address, as you can see at the bottom there. If you end up doing an event, telling us about it would be invaluable. It would really help help us with that evidence base as to what we're doing, and not only how many people are STEM ambassadors, but what events they're involved in, how many events they're involved in, where they are, what they did, and it will help us link together, and it will help us provide more targeted support for those kind of things. And just generally spread the word that we exist, and that it's something we need to encourage, and that as an industry, if we don't encourage it, we could find ourselves with struggling to recruit in the long term the calibre of people we need to move it forward.